You've probably seen it. It's popping up more and more online, right? Maybe TikTok, Reddit.
Yeah.
These conversations around transracial identity, it's a topic that, well, it gets complex fast, sparks a lot of debate,
It really
makes
does.
us rethink some really fundamental ideas,
Yeah,
you know, about who we are, how we see each other.
absolutely. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. Our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack transracialism.
Okay.
Look at what it is, the pretty intense arguments around it, the ethics, and even where it might be heading in the future.
And we've pulled together quite a mix of sources for this, haven't we?
We have everything from like academic papers to YouTube videos. I think we even have stuff from the Transracial RCTA page.
Yeah, that specific community page, plus personal stories off Reddit and, the basics from Wikipedia. The goal is really to give you, our listener, a solid grasp without it feeling like too much.
And importantly, we're aiming to present this stuff impartially, just drawing from the material provided so you get the clearest, most balanced view we can offer.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with the big one. What even is race? Because our sources really push back on some common ideas.
Yeah, that's the foundation, isn't it? We often think of race as like fixed, biological fact, set in stone.
Right.
But the sources we looked at, the overwhelming consensus there is that race is primarily a social construct.
Social construct.
Yeah, think about the Human Genome Project. It famously found more genetic variation within these so-called racial groups than between them.
Wow. Okay, so more difference inside the group than between different groups.
Exactly, which kind of undermines that idea of distinct biological races, you know?
It really does. So these categories, they're human inventions.
That's what the sources argue. Shaped by history, culture, power dynamics, not inherently biological. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's crucial to see they weren't just neutral labels.
No.
No, they were often tools designed really to create and justify hierarchies, power, oppression, the stuff that still echoes today. And it changes. Look at how race is understood differently across cultures or even across time.
Like Brazil's fluid categories versus the old one-drop rule in the U.S.
Precisely. And the history, it's pretty stark when you look at it.
Yeah, the sources mention the 17th century, European exploration, colonialism.
Right. Figures like Bernier, Linnaeus, Blumenbach, they weren't just observing. They were actively creating these hierarchical classifications.
And those were used to justify, well, awful things.
Exactly. Dominance, exploitation, the Atlantic slave trade, white supremacy. It's a heavy history tied into the very concept.
Okay, but what about physical traits?
Mhm.
Like hair texture, skin color? The sources touch on that, right?
They do. They acknowledge observable traits exist, influenced by climate and ancestry, like hair texture can be sort of flat, oval, or round.
Exactly.
Skin color varies. But the key point is, these traits don't neatly map onto distinct biological races.
Part of a spectrum, continuous variation.
Exactly. Continuous and non-concordant, meaning different traits don't always stick together in predictable packages.
Okay, so if race isn't this fixed biological thing,
Yeah.
that leads us right into transracial identity, doesn't it?
It does. What happens when someone identifies with a race different from the one they were assigned at birth?
So how do the sources define transracialism? It's distinct from the adoption context, right?
Yes, very distinct. It's defined as an individual identifying with a race different from their birth-assigned one, and the motivations behind it. They're really diverse, according to what we read.
Okay, like what?
Well, for some, it's about aligning their internal sense of self with how they look or want to look.
An internal feeling needing external expression.
Kind of. Others feel this incredibly deep cultural connection. Like one Reddit user, Zitopan, felt profoundly drawn to Japanese culture. So they adopted certain looks, clothes, hair, makeup. It was about feeling a sense of belonging.
Interesting. But it's not always a positive cultural pull, is it? The sources mention other, maybe darker motivations.
Right. Sometimes it seems to be a way to escape something. Trauma, maybe societal pressure, even internalized racism.
Like the examples of Michael Jackson's changing appearance,
Yeah.
or the black woman in Europe feeling pressured by certain beauty standards.
Exactly. And there was that really tough anecdote about a family member considering self-harm because of internalized racism. It shows the intense personal struggles that can be tangled up in this.
Gosh, so it can be incredibly complex personally.
Definitely. And some people even identify as transracial to deliberately challenge the whole idea of fixed racial categories. They want to abolish them altogether.
And this is playing out in online communities too. Subreddits, Discord.
Yeah, places like R Transracial, Racial, Ask Transrace. They're spaces where these experiences and ideas are being shared and discussed.
Okay, so building on that,
Hmm.
a really common point of discussion or maybe contention is the comparison to transgender identity. How do the sources handle that?
Well, some proponents of transracialism definitely draw that parallel. The
Hmm.
argument is, both involve an internal sense of self, not matching an assigned identity, gender in one case, race in the other.
So the question becomes, if society is increasingly accepting gender fluidity, why not racial fluidity?
That's the question they pose. But the sources also present really strong counter-arguments to that analogy.
Okay, like what?
A major one is the idea that racial oppression is intergenerational. It's tied to this long shared history of systemic disadvantage, injustice, trauma.
History you can't just opt out of individually.
Exactly. Simon Cushing brings this up, using the example of Canadian Indian residential schools and the reparations that followed. It highlights that race isn't just individual, it's deeply collective, historical.
And that ties into the criticism about white privilege, doesn't it?
It often does.
Yeah.
The argument is that a white person identifying as another race might be seen as exercising a privilege they can sort of try on an identity without the lived history of systemic discrimination that comes with it.
The Rachel Dolezal or Sean King cases often come up here.
They do. And another key difference raised is the biological basis. While there's growing understanding of potential biological or neurochemical factors in gender identity.
The scientific consensus, as we discussed, sees the biological basis for race as weak.
Right. Which makes the analogy difficult for many critics. Plus, race is often seen as what some call a policed category.
Policed, meaning?
Meaning it's been so central to civil rights, to struggles for justice, that there's concern that individual choice might somehow undermine the collective action needed to fight systemic racism.
That makes sense.
Right.
Which leads naturally into another big concern, cultural appropriation.
Yes. And the worry about trivialization.
How is appropriation defined here?
It's generally seen as adopting superficial elements, clothes, hairstyles, maybe bits of language from another culture without really understanding or respecting their original meaning, their significance, or the struggles tied to that culture.
So it can come across as reducing a culture to a costume.
That's the criticism, yeah. And our sources mention some pretty specific examples of physical changes people have undergone.
Like Ollie London wanting to look Korean. Or Martina Biggs' procedures to appear, black skin darkening, eye color, hair.
Exactly. These kinds of transformations raise concerns for critics. They worry that this kind of identification might trivialize the real ongoing struggles of racial minorities, as if centuries of inequality can just be bypassed by personal choice.
And does colorism play into this at all?
It can, unfortunately. Altering appearance can sometimes reinforce harmful beauty standards that favor lighter skin, even within a racial group. The sources mention the historical brown paper bag test, that kind of internal bias.
So unsurprisingly, people identifying as transracial often face a lot of pushback.
Oh, definitely. Intense backlash, controversy, and in these heated online spaces, sometimes really dangerous ideas get mixed in.
Like those conspiracy theories, the white genocide or great replacement
Yeah.
stuff.
And let's be really clear, based on the sources, these are baseless racist narratives. They twist demographic data to create this false sense of victimhood for white people, and they're often used to justify white supremacy.
And tragically linked to real-world violence, too. Buffalo, Norway.
Exactly. It really shows how tribalism, echo chambers online, they can amplify bias and disconnect people from reality.
Which just highlights how important it is to approach these complex, charged topics
With empathy, right.
and try to have respectful dialogue, even when it's hard.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we can shift gears a bit, look towards the future.
Yeah.
Because technology is, well, it's changing the game when it comes to identity modification.
You mean beyond current cosmetic procedures
Yeah.
like hair, makeup, tanning, even plastic surgery?
Yeah, people use those now to try and align appearance with identity. But our sources point out the limits, right? You can't easily change bone structure, for instance. Some feel a full physical transition just isn't possible yet.
But yet is the key word, because the sources talk about gene editing.
Exactly. Things like CRISPR, TALEN, these are tools for precisely editing DNA. It's still mostly theoretical for like a full race change, but medical gene editing is advancing so fast
That it raises the possibility, however distant, of directly altering traits we associate with race, skin tone, hair, facial features,
yeah.
by changing DNA.
It's a mind-bending possibility. And then there's the even more futuristic stuff, almost sci-fi.
Nanobots. Total morphological freedom.
Yeah, hypothetical nanobot chambers for complete body reshaping, wild stuff. But we don't even need to go that far. Think about virtual reality, avatars.
Right. People already create digital identities, including racial ones, that differ from their physical selves. The lines are already blurring.
They really are. Which brings us to some massive ethical questions.
Like if we actually gain the power to choose and change our physical race, what would that even mean for society? Would racial categories still matter?
It's a huge ethical minefield, isn't it? Concerns about eugenics pop up immediately, designer babies, the potential for massive inequality if only the rich could afford it.
And what about cultural diversity? Would it get eroded or homogenized if everyone could just pick their features?
These are huge questions. It really puts the responsibility on us as a society to think now about how we'd use such powerful tools, assuming they become reality. The impact on how we see ourselves, each other, it's profound.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it's clear transracial identity is incredibly complex, multi-layered.
Definitely. We've gone from the social construction of race through motivations, ethical debates, history, right up to these futuristic technological possibilities.
And I think a key takeaway is that this isn't a simple label. It forces us, really, to confront our own assumptions about race, identity, belonging.
And it underscores how important it is to approach these conversations with empathy, with nuance, being willing to listen even when ideas challenge us.
Absolutely. And it highlights that tension, doesn't it, between an individual's right to define themselves and the weight of collective history, social reality, and lived experience tied to race.
That tension is right at the heart of it.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, thinking about that future tech. Imagine genome editing does become sophisticated enough for someone to physically change traits to match a chosen racial identity. Would that actually make transracial identification more legitimate in society's eyes?
Or would it just further complicate things, blurring biology, identity, social constructs even more, leaving us with even trickier ethical knots to untangle?
Definitely something to chew on. This conversation is far from over, clearly.
No easy answers here. We really encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking these tough questions, keep engaging. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.